Hi, this is Laura Forehand from the Desert Sanctuary podcast. As we have authentic discussions about deconstruction and religious trauma, please be aware that some episodes may contain stories of sexual abuse and or suicide. Please take care of your mental health. We love you. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi there. Welcome back to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl Forehand, and we are continuing our discussion on good questions. Good questions that we've asked since deconstructing, since being out in the desert. And Carl has been working on putting those on many different social media outlets. So the next question we want to tackle today is, why do I fear? Or where do we get the ideas of what we should be afraid of?
Yeah. And it's probably way deeper than what the 30 minutes or whatever that we've allowed for this. But fear is a big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think fear primarily gets influenced by our family of origin, of course, our religion, not of choice, our religion that we were given, usually. And I think what we want to ask, is not to, and I want to talk about my family and my grandparents, but because I just don't want to just bash families, is moms, grandmas, and
right,
stuff like
what we inherit is probably what they inherited, right? Exactly. It's just like getting passed down. It's like I always say, you do the best you can with the tools that you have. And so to bash people or certain groups of people or whatever, like mothers, for example, I think mothers kind of get a bad rap a lot of times. But I don't blame my mom for anything, and hopefully my children don't blame me, because hopefully they realize my mom did the best she can with what she has, and now that she knows better, she can do better, kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I want to ask the question, do they understand the subjects they're cautioning me about? Or are they simply fearful due to their lack of understanding? We've been watching the
Alaskan bush
people, and it's
interesting.
You want to present it like this is so great of a way to live and so on, and they
first episode in, I was like, I could never do this.
Yeah.
Never.
I can't imagine myself talking you into that, because I remember when we stayed in a fifth wheel one time, and that was about your limit of bugs outside.
Right. And I think the fifth wheel, if I'm thinking of the right situation, had to have air conditioning. And
Yeah.
So I am not a camper. I'm really not even a glamper. I prefer to have a hotel room that is totally climate controlled and a soft bed.
And nothing against them living that lifestyle, but since they have lived that lifestyle, they've cut themselves off from parts of society. They're not up on the news and things like that. So some of the advice they may be giving is not necessarily universal advice. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, were really good people. Their community loved them, but they were limited in their understanding. They had pretty much not been out of their little place they live in, the place in Oklahoma they live in. They understood some things, but they made a lot of hilarious statements about their neighbors that they barely knew, you know, and things
Mhm.
like that. And, you know, it's not that they're bad people, it's just that they don't necessarily, some of the things that they were afraid of probably wasn't warranted. Some of it was exaggerated
Mhm.
and things like that. So I
Mhm.
think we need to examine the origins of or absence of their experience when people talk about what they're afraid of. Should we
Right.
really be afraid of that? Does it merit anything? And I think, you know, our children did an excellent job of saying, well, Dad, Mom, I know you believe that. I know
Mhm.
you're afraid of that, but we're
Mhm.
not. Or there's some
Right.
things we're afraid of that you're not. And it's really important to investigate those and look deeper at them.
Right.
I think when we follow a leader, when we follow someone else, we should recognize their limitations of understanding.
Mhm.
So even our mom, even our grandma,
Mhm.
even our pastor have they have blind spots, they have limited understanding, they don't know everything.
Right.
Just like I would caution you not to listen to us and say we know everything. We
Mm.
know some things about some areas that we've experienced. Um,
But
and
our experience may not be your experience.
yeah, and you know, we not only may we have limited understanding, but an experience, but we also may have just interpreted things wrong. And it's important not to just say, I need to be afraid of all the things that my parents were.
Mm.
And I mean, they're the ones we trust them though, because they're the ones that taught us the stove is hot,
Right.
you know, and some of those things, don't run out in the street, don't get run over. So, so there are, so you can't live your life without fear.
Mhm.
But if we go back to the Bible, there's many injunctions not to fear,
Mhm.
but there's probably a few things we should be careful. We should, you know,
Yeah, I
walk
would say more like
circumspectly.
cautious, careful,
Yeah.
right?
Learn.
Think before you act, things like that. I think those are a better description than fear, because to me, fear is all consuming. That's how I experience it. It's just all consuming and it just kind of takes over
Yeah.
every aspect of your life.
We talked about addiction, you know, I talked about skydiving and so on. So plenty of people told me to be afraid of skydiving, but skydiving was statistically safer than driving a car. Um, it it was relatively safe. The only people that died from skydiving, and generally most of them were people that didn't put their parachute on. They were committing suicide in essence. So before we follow someone blindly, just first of all ask a lot of questions. Why do you fear that? Is that true?
Mm.
And then investigate for yourself. I want to say do your own research because that people don't experience that very well anymore. Um, but before you follow someone, check it out, ask the questions. And so, one of the things I would recommend is reading Plato's Allegory of the Cave, where it's just a story of prisoners, people that were imprisoned in a cave and chained, and they just stared at the wall all
Mm.
day. And so they're staring at the wall inside a cave. Um, all they see is that the wall of the cave that they're staring at, and behind them is the opening to the cave. So some light pours in and makes different images on the wall. If
Mhm.
somebody is outside,
Right.
they'll see the reflection of the
Kind of cast the shadow sort of
yeah,
thing.
kind of
Yeah.
a distorted image of them. They probably also see their captors occasionally,
Hmm.
but go through that Plato's allegory of the cave because uh, how many eye-opening discoveries do they make once they're released
Mm.
from that cave? They had never seen the world that way,
Right.
but they would tell you, you know, be aware of those shadow people, you know, because we don't know about them. They're probably to be feared,
Hmm.
and and different people have interpreted that allegory, differently over the years,
Mhm.
but it's a very good example of how we are sometimes. We know our environment, maybe not a cave like that, but maybe we've spent a lot of time in church,
Yeah.
looking at the same wall, essentially, right? And seeing what they wanted us to see and being afraid of what they wanted us to be afraid of,
Mhm.
right? But our vision, our experience is always limited, and to what degree that's limited will affect how you approach life, right?
Right.
And so I think that's a good place to start when you're talking about what we're afraid of,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. And I think you have to also realize that, you know, confronting a pastor, about and questioning those fears that maybe they bring up in a sermon or something like that is probably not going to be met with. I mean, it's going to be met with some resistance. I mean, I would say just know that going in, but don't let that stop you. Don't let that guilt you into not doing your own research and answering your own questions. Like you have those questions for a reason, right? I feel like, if you're still in, a religious institution and you want to say it's the Holy Spirit, I feel like it's my intuition. My intuition is trying to teach me something. So keep asking yourself those questions, even if you come up, up against a wall, I guess, especially if it's a spiritual leader. Because as we've talked about before, most spiritual leaders do not like to be challenged, um, because there's a little bit of that narcissism
Mhm.
that's in them.
Yeah. So when I look back on 60 years, I I'm not impressed with the things that I didn't do. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I'm not impressed that wow, I followed all of my family's guidelines on what not to do because they were afraid of it. Uh, I purposefully faced some of those fears, like learning to skydive, we talked about in
Mhm.
the last episode, or
Mhm.
hunting, go out hunting by myself,
Mhm.
and confronting those fears that I might have had from misinformation or maybe no information. But going out and confronting them, that doesn't mean that, I had to experience something catastrophic there, but maybe just look into it a little bit more. Go out to a drop zone and see what it's like to skydive,
Mhm.
and then your call on whether to invest, to max out your credit card to get that experience. But it was important for me to get that experience
Mhm.
because then I was less afraid of a lot of other
Mhm.
things,
Right.
Um, you might have observed a social shift towards a more mystical approach to spirituality. Mystics derive their insights from personal experience rather than merely echoing beliefs passed down to them. That's theology.
Mhm.
And unlike theologians who seek to validate historical assumptions, mystics do not search for reinterpreting old ideas simply to attract audiences to the next event. We must emerge from this, what I wrote. We must emerge from the cave, viewing the world with new perspectives and asking sincere questions rather than just repeating the fears of the past. It can't ever be, um, well, we don't do that as a family. That's dangerous and we don't go there. I think each person needs to make their own, build on those assumptions from the past, maybe, but go experience
Right.
what you can. Doesn't mean you are reckless or dive into things head first or put yourself in danger. But it does mean that you have to face that fear. And as Brene Brown said, there's no bravery without vulnerability.
Mhm.
So you got to measure how much vulnerability you can stand,
Mhm.
right? And how
Right.
much you can put yourself at risk. But usually when you experience it, you go, oh, that's not as bad as I thought. Right.
That reminds me of like when we went to our first pride because, you know, all our married life being inside the Baptist church, it's people that are homosexual or transgender or whatever. I mean, we were to fear them, right? They're not living a godly lifestyle. They're probably going to go to hell. Don't let them, pull you in, pull you down, whatever. And then we went and we experienced our first pride, and I can't even explain it. The amount of love and acceptance and inclusion that was a part of that. We've been to two now. Parts of those days was nothing like I ever experienced in church, because there is that underlying fear of people that are not like us.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were happy too. That's one thing that
Right.
you notice more than anything. They were happy. So how does religion use this fear and control? There are lots of different denominations, chapters, different perspectives on faith and so on. So you can choose many of those, but what they kind of have in common is this insistence that you'll never find safety outside of our community.
Mm-hmm.
It's anything out there is the world, and it's dangerous. And regardless that, there's tens of thousands of denominations, they all claim to have ultimate truth. And so we're right. God is on our side. So don't venture out there too far, because everything out there is dangerous if it's not under our supervision.
Right.
So many pastors now are realizing they invested all this energy in nurturing our fears to uphold the doctrines they already had, the assumptions, the fears, the way people imagined it might be out there. And we've kind of inherited all of that from someone else, right? Or
Very
another
true.
group, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can speak up from my own, like I grew up Lutheran. We didn't fear a lot of the things that the Baptist denomination feared. And yet,
I feared being a Baptist.
Probably, but when we got married and I became, in air quotes, a Baptist, there was a whole new set of fears. I'm not saying we didn't fear anything in the Lutheran denomination. I don't feel like I remember a whole lot about that, except going to church all the time and confirmation. Those are about the only things I remember from my growing up years. But just shifting over to being a Baptist, there were so many fears that I didn't have that now I had inherited from that denomination.
Yeah. Another implication of that is you will experience hardship if you don't conform to our way of thinking. So, this organization or the pastor and their concepts of well-being rest on assumptions that must be protected. So they come up with this narrative of, if you go outside of that, you're in danger of whatever, being attacked by something else, falling into this. They use dangerous a lot,
which is spiritual manipulation, spiritual traumatization. I mean, yeah. 100%.
So that kind of, it keeps you kind of disconnected from those things you want to experience, want to know more about. Just trust us. We have I saw, this probably get me in trouble for saying, but I saw there's a book that the United Methodists get, I think after you're ordained, but it's kind of like, this is how we feel about everything. This is kind of where we're at, it's a fairly good sized book. It looks like. I've never seen it in person or evaluated, so I can't be afraid of it. Right.
Right.
And so on. But I think every denomination has that, whether it's a
Sure.
Baptist
Oh, yeah.
statement, statement of belief and fact,
Uh-huh.
whatever they are,
Uh-huh.
faith, and I can't remember what theirs is called, but Catholics have one, every denomination kind of
Every
has their
denomination.
version of their belief statement and so on. Says, you know, it's going to go better for you if you just kind of stay within our beliefs and our fears and the things we don't want to do or we don't want to experience. But they will also say you won't find community out there. That's one big fear factor. If you step away from this community, you'll lose your community. And truth is, all you're going to lose is that community.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. You will lose that community, but trust us when we say you have other communities, and we've talked about it before. We've talked about it several times on the podcast and even in this series, that there are many different ways to find community besides just church. However, I do believe that church kind of implants that fear that this is the true community. And if you leave this community, you will have no community.
Never find it. Yeah, it's true. And even though we're called Second Baptist and don't go to First Baptist because there's the reason we left them. We're afraid of some stuff they think. Anyway, another assumption from my previous denomination, you will expose yourself to the devil, right? When you question the church's doctrine or you cease to attend services, they're going to treat you like you have a contagious virus. And they're going to tell you what you should be afraid of, that the devil is somehow going to get you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it still is one of those things, like, I try to wrap my head around, but I don't really spend a lot of extra energy on it. But it's interesting to me that with every church we left, these supposedly Christ-like, loving people cut off all communication with us.
Yeah. And one of the main reasons is that, well, number one, they're just too engaged in everything they're doing.
Or they might be afraid that we have exposed ourselves to the devil.
Right. And then, yeah,
that we're sliding down a slippery slope.
They're afraid to consider anything outside their narrow beliefs. But they also, if you do that, good for you. Maybe you will find it. Maybe Satan's going to get you.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to take that chance. We don't risk like that. We stay within our circle.
We stay, with our people.
And I want to suggest the church failed to protect me when I faced genuine emotional struggles. They failed to comprehend, and they were reluctant to dedicate time to support my recovery. My grief seemed unimportant to them, and their commitment to understanding trauma-related issues was minimal. After 2 decades of observing their practices, I ultimately recognized that their focus was not on my protection, but rather on safeguarding their organization's longevity and the careers of their ministry personnel. And I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah.
I no longer fear a being that I now don't believe in. Think independently, and I've done the work studying history and studying how the doctrines came about, and concepts like hell and the devil, I think, were merely assumptions that created fear and kept people in control.
Right.
So another thing people might say in Christianity is you won't know how to live without us. In other words, how are you going to get your morals when you don't have the Bible or don't trust in the Bible for your morals? Yeah, and that's an hour-long discussion right about.
I know, because I'm like, well, we left organized religion. What? I don't even know, Carl. Was it 8 years ago? Something like that. And we've yet to commit some ungodly, horrific act.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say I'm probably more moral now because I'm more inclusive, I'm more compassionate, I'm more loving,
more authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's real important. The Bible is not the only thing that teaches morals. The thing is, it also teaches just as many things that are immoral, like murder and genocide, and the things that happen in the Old Testament, but also the slavery that wasn't ever addressed.
Right.
All of those things, and so I don't think the Bible is in any way have a moral high ground on anything else. And lots of other religions teach you to be moral, and even without religion, we learn how to treat each other by spending time together. We spend time with
Right.
other people. We learn, what makes them sad, what hurts them,
Right.
because we've been hurt and we've experienced life, not because there's a perfect system or a perfect book to lay out our morals. And
Right.
if you're saying that the Bible is the ultimate moral high ground, I would say you're in trouble because it's not that great.
There's a lot of questionable things in the
It doesn't
Bible.
mean I don't support loving your neighbor,
Right.
the golden rule.
But if you're going to
things like
take the
that.
Bible as the moral high ground, you have to take all of it.
Yeah.
Right. You can't just take those. I agree with you. Those are the bits and pieces I want to hold on to. Loving your neighbor, helping the widow and the sick and the orphan. Those are the things I want to hold on to. But if I'm going to say that is my ultimate authority on morality, then I have to take all of it.
Yeah. And you might learn morality from a Baptist pastor like Martin Luther King Jr. But you may also learn it from Gandhi. Who's Gandhi? Gandhi, or other people in history that
Right.
experienced and demonstrated morality to us. And if you're looking to find the moral high ground, you'll find it. And you can't stay in a broken system that talks out of both sides of its mouth and just dogmatically claim this is it. My denomination, my narrow view of everything is exactly right. God is on our side, and so you're not going to have that without us. Be afraid of that. Be afraid that if you try to go even to the Methodist Church or you go to Second Baptist instead of First Baptist, I don't know if they're the moral high ground or not. I think we are. And that's just fear to keep you there.
Right.
One of the last things I want to mention is particularly with pastors, they were kind of skilled at conveying the idea the world is against you. This resonated with the congregations I attend, and they often preferred to escape reality by immersing themselves in artificial community. However, if we take a step back and look at the universe more objectively, we may discover the contrary. Some might even argue that the world or the universe actually supports our advancement. And I take that from some of the teachers that are out there right now that talk about how the universe is rigged in our favor. And that just people recoil from that right away. But if you just look at nature and look at how, take a plant, and all the molecules in the plant are geared towards reproduction, thriving, surviving, moving ahead, going forward. So the world out there is not against you. Yeah, I think if we would again take more time to experience things like nature and maybe even walk across the street to meet your neighbors, we have the direct example, of that. But meet your neighbors, you may find that they're not just horribly evil people out to get you or something, or destroy your witness or faith or whatever. That if we take some time to get outside the walls of our narrow beliefs and investigate, we'd find out that a lot of human beings all across the world with different belief systems are striving to be more moral, and they're also willing to help each other and work together, and that all of the universe in essence, is working towards that. The cells in your body are working towards unity and reproduction and surviving and getting better.
Right.
That the whole world is not against you. Just because we can highlight a few people that are horrible people doesn't mean that everybody in the world is horrible.
Right.
Or even everybody in a particular political belief system or a religious belief system is bad. So the constant preaching that the world is totally against you and totally terrible and out for your destruction, all those things you say when you're preaching, it's just ginning up the fear. Is that an okay word to use? Ginning up?
I guess. I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
Conjuring up fear.
Yeah. Yeah. So that definitely in that mindset. So I said, when we step beyond narrow religious beliefs and we put ourselves at risk, we don't put ourselves at risk. Instead, we create an opportunity to align with our world and experience more of what we seek. If God exists, maybe that was what he meant by fear not. When he said it, so when the Bible says it so many times,
right?
Keep asking good questions, have reasonable suspicions about things, but then use your experience to encounter those fears, to face those fears, instead of huddling together and,
right.
Letting the fear control us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.